Okay. Can you hear? Welcome. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. Welcome to our February focus group. It's quite fitting that our topic for today is diversity, opportunity, and inclusion, because February is Black.
The volume needs to be higher.
How do I?
Up closer.
Up closer?
Yes, please.
Okay, there we go.
Yes. We can hear better.
Okay. Okay, it's Black History Month, so this topic is very appropriate for this month, and we are honored to have as our guest speaker the Chief Diversity Officer for the Commonwealth of Virginia, Mr. Martin D. Brown. Mr. Brown is Director of the Office of Diversity, Opportunity, and Inclusion under Governor Glenn Youngkin. He has extensive experience in private sector and he has extensive experience. What's that?
Just tilt it a bit. There.
He has, I have to look at this, I'm gonna hold it up. He has extensive experience in the private sector and state government, serving in senior executive positions for 3 previous governors. As Commissioner of the Virginia Department of Social Services, he led and managed over 1,700 employees in 120 locations, overseeing the development of an online customer portal, safe reductions of children in foster care, and increases in adoption, as well as the development of a practice model strengthening Virginia families at every client contact. As advisor to the governor for prisoner reentry and family reintegration, he established a best practice family strengthening program that is now expanded statewide. As policy advisor to the governor, he coordinated the state visit of Mrs. Coretta Scott King and the recognition of Martin Luther King Jr. as the first African-American permanently memorialized on Virginia's historic Capitol Square. While serving as Assistant Secretary of Health and Human Resources, Chief Brown helped lead Virginia's welfare reform effort. In addition to his private sector experience, Mr. Brown has worked with hundreds of diverse individuals from 6 of the 7 continents as president of the Providence Management Group, a media and public relations firm, and as manager of Chick-fil-A. He is founding board member of the Gloucester Institute, served on the board of Elijah House Academy and the Richmond Christian Leadership Institute, and as a pastoral deacon for 14 years at Kingsway Community Church. Chief Brown is a graduate of Howard University and the Virginia Executive Institute at Virginia Commonwealth University. He and his wife, Nita, live in the Richmond area with their 2 adult children. So, please help me give a warm welcome to Mr. Martin D. Brown. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. I'm going to take this off, that way you guys can hear me, okay? It was great to be here. Nice to meet you all. As Linda mentioned, my name is Martin Brown, and I also brought my deputy, Michael Perez, so I'd like you all to welcome him as well.
All right.
I want to have a conversation with you today about Black history. And in many respects, when we have this conversation, we're not just talking about it, but we've lived it. I'm in my 60s. My parents 87 and 86. And in many respects, just like you, they've seen and lived history more than just read about it and talked about it. Would you say that's true?
Yes.
I mean, from what kind of cars did we drive 50 years ago? Did they have batteries in them? The batteries started them, but they didn't run them, right?
Right.
Now, what kind of, I remember the Jetsons. Y'all remember the Jetsons?
Yes.
Yeah.
And there were two things in the Jetsons that I remember about the Jetsons. The Jetsons, they had this box where you could put food in, and then the food would all of a sudden it would materialize. It was a microwave. And then they had this watch that you could put on your wrist and talk to folks, like an Apple Watch. And so we've seen the past, experienced it, and actually seen it happen in the future. One of the things that I want to do in talking about our history is talk about some of the great leaders in our history. Some of the people who actually led us in our history. I had a football coach at Howard University, and one of the things that he said was, Martin, if you're going to make a mistake, make it an aggressive mistake. If you're going to make a mistake, don't be passive. Don't not do something, because that's a mistake too, if you don't do it. Do it aggressively, and as you do it aggressively, we'll let you know if you made a mistake or not. We've all lived lives where we can reflect on and say, well, I would do that differently, or I would do that better. But the other thing I want to talk about today is people who lived aggressive, effectual, consequential lives. They may have made a couple of mistakes, but they made aggressive mistakes. They were purposeful. They were deliberate. They were intentional. Is that okay? Can I talk to you all about that? Would that be good?
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, I'm going to start off with a quote that's on the Civil Rights Monument in the state's capital. 2005, Governor Warner decided, and with a group of folks, that he was going to build a monument to the civil rights movement that took place here in Virginia, with some of the leaders represented. And on that monument, on that memorial, they're going to put a quote. Now, it's important because they could have put any quote by anybody. But the quote was really important because it not only represented the past, it also represents what happened and what could happen in the future. What can we do in the future? This is what the quote reads. The legal system can force open doors. The legal system can force open doors. And sometimes even tear down walls. The legal system can force open doors and sometimes tear down walls. But it cannot build bridges. The legal system cannot build bridges. That job belongs to you and to me. The job of building bridges belongs to you and to me. And who said that was a person who tore down walls and built bridges, a guy named Thurgood Marshall, who was an attorney for the NAACP and eventual Supreme Court Justice. What do you think he meant by that? And why would he say that? Because he focused both on opening doors, which were necessary, tearing down walls, which were vital, but also building bridges. Why would he focus on that? And why is building bridges so important? So when we talk about history today, we're going to talk about the importance of history. And I believe that history, just like you all can reflect on in your 60 years or 70 years or 80 years or even 90 years, when you look back and you reflect on what's important, I would venture to say that people, relationships are probably a little bit more important than the things. How hard was it to build some of those bridges? How easy was it to tear them down? How hard was it to open doors? How hard was it to knock down walls? Sometimes it takes years to build bridges, and they come down lickety-split. When we talk about Black history, we're not just talking about history of African Americans. We're talking about American history. We're talking about the history of America. When we think of American history, it's interwoven with the history of Irish Catholics. It's interwoven with the history of Hungarian Jews, of South Americans, of people fleeing from Africa or India or South America, all coming to America, this land of promise and opportunity. It's also a story of Africans who were forced to come here against their will. But when we talk about Black history, we're talking about all of it. We're talking about all history, and we're talking about American history. Because as much as Black history is American history is the history of African Americans as well. The United States is the most successful pluralistic society in the world, period. There is no other country. And if y'all, I would just ask you, what other countries can you all think of where there is such diversity?
Canada.
Canada's good.
Yeah.
Great Britain.
No.
What's the percentage of people of African descent in Canada? Of Indian descent from Canada, of Southeast Asian descent. What's the percentage of people from South America who live in Canada? See, what's fascinating about America is that people from around the world come here. What blew me away, we lived in Fairfax County for a number of years, my wife and I. And in Fairfax County today, when you go to the Fairfax Public Schools, there are 182 different languages and dialects that are spoken of the children who go to Fairfax County Public Schools. I had to double check that number. I didn't know there were 182 different languages and dialects. I mean, 182. So you have Croats learning beside Kurds. You have Hutus learning beside Tutsis. You have people from Mongolia learning beside people from India. You have people who are South American learning from people who are from Bangladesh. And they're all getting along. There is They aren't calling the police every day to come and break up fights. Right? It's fascinating. We live in an amazing country with an amazing array and an amazing diversity of people who are all choosing to get along, all choosing to flourish, all choosing to support one another, all choosing to provide opportunities, receive opportunities, and to give opportunities. And not only is this an American thing, but I think it's a Virginia thing as well. Because Virginia was the birthplace of some of the greatest architects who were complex. Because when you think of Jefferson, who writes these amazing truths, and that all men are created equal, yet he owned slaves. Right? It's complex. It's paradoxical, right? But it's true. You think of Madison, who wrote most of the Constitution. You think of all of these amazing people from Virginia. The Bill of Rights was written by Jefferson here, and it started off as the Virginia Bill of Rights here in Virginia to protect our religious freedom so that we could be free of religious tyranny. It's an amazing thing. When we look at Virginia, and I mentioned over 90% of Virginia's high school students earn degrees. So we're not just, we're a learned community. 90% of Virginians have high school education, 40% have earned college degrees. We're one of the best states to do business. There are 28,262 minority-owned businesses in Virginia. 28,000. There are 31,800 women-owned businesses in Virginia. The invisible threads that weave this tapestry of separate and distinct cultures is amazing. I like to call it, people like to say America is a melting pot, but I like stew better than melting pot. Because a melting pot is all one big goo, right? It's all one flavor. But a stew, you got potatoes, and you got beef, and you got carrots, and you got peas, and all have their own distinct flavors. But then the flavors all come together to make another flavor, which is America, which is pretty cool. It's pretty cool. The Office of Diversity, Opportunity, and Inclusion, which I'm a part of, which I lead, our desire is to do three things. Is to promote diversity, expand opportunity, and to inform, encourage, and promote inclusion. Our desire is to recognize the diversity that we already have and try to expand it. My first day on the job, I pulled the governor. Actually, this is before my first day. As I'm being interviewed by the governor, I asked him, I said, Governor Youngkin, so what is your idea of diversity, opportunity, and inclusion? Because if I'm going to represent you, I want to know what you're thinking. And he said, Martin, I'm a businessman. I have invested in companies for most of my career. And one of the things that I do when I look at companies is I go in and I see if they're prepared to deal with the challenges of today, and they're able to look over the horizon and address the problems of tomorrow. And I recognize that if their board of leaders, if their senior leadership team isn't diverse in thought, and their diverse thoughts are represented by their backgrounds, if they aren't diverse in their backgrounds and in their thoughts, they're not going to be able to handle the challenges of tomorrow. They're not going to be able to handle the challenges of today. And so I have invested in companies that demonstrate, represent diversity throughout my entire career. And that's what I expect here in Virginia. I said, okay, sign me up, sir. I'm all for it. Because he not only talks the talk, he believes it. He's walked the walk. His heart, and I'm proud to represent it, is to see everybody flourish. And the way that you help people to flourish is you remove impediments. We're intentional about removing obstacles, tearing down walls, opening doors, and then building bridges. The building bridges part is hard. Why is it hard? Because I've been a bridge builder most of my life. How many of y'all know Black Republicans? Nobody raised hand. Yeah. Oh, you got, so one person knows a Black Republican. So I've been building bridges most of my life, because guess what happens when you build bridges? You get walked on by both sides, right? And so the key to building bridges is not taking yourself seriously, but taking what you're trying to do very, very seriously. One of the things that I wanted to share with you all today was the story of 3 people. And before I jump into that, just to give you some background about me, as I mentioned, my heart has been to be a bridge builder most of my life. But prior to that, I was just a football player from Howard University. My identity was wrapped up in hitting people as a middle linebacker at Howard University. I enjoyed tackling people and hitting them hard. That was and my identity was wrapped up into that. So I was Martin, football player Brown. And it wasn't until my 4th year that the chaplain of our team challenged me with some eternal truths that shook me to the core. And one of the things that he did was he saw that I was really a football player, and I was a knucklehead. You know, a knucklehead. They're not bad guys. They do stupid stuff. And, they're not ill-intended. They're knuckleheads. I was a knucklehead. And I was also, wine, women, and song, right? And he knew that, saw through me because I tried to play the role, and he saw right through me, and he looked in my eyes and he leaned close. And whenever we get together, and I keep dropping these papers, but he looked right at me, he leaned forward, and he said, "Martin, I just want you to know, I love you, bro. And I'm praying for you." That rocked me to the core. And just to repeat that, he said, "I love you. And I'm praying for you." It shook me because I knew he knew who I was. And he still loved me. I was like, wait, you know me. You know I'm a knucklehead. But he still loved me. It shook me to my core. And it challenged me to learn more about this love, this unconditional, forgiving love that changed his heart, and that allowed my heart to change as well. So I went from being a knucklehead football player to one who loves God and loves Christ. That's my personal story. Because what happened when that moment happened, when my heart changed, my motivations changed. My want tos changed. It wasn't have tos. I didn't feel like I had to do something, but my want tos changed. And when I didn't want to just hang out with the guys anymore. And they began to test me. Like, what's up with you, Brown? Oh, you don't want to hang out with the fellas? No, not really. And so they began to test me. And then I began to see the world literally. It was almost like in Technicolor. It went from black and white to Technicolor. And it was amazing. Amazing. I share that so that you understand that when my life changed, the biggest thing about history, and not just America, when we talk about Black history, is relationship. And I know my heart changed, and so my relationships changed. My relationships with God and my relationships with others. And so when we talk about history, your history, the history of America, the history of Virginia, the history of anybody, it really is a discussion about how did people relate to one another? How did they relate to their friends? How did they relate to their families? And how did they relate to those that they didn't know, like, or even agree with? And that's big. That's real big. Because if I don't agree with somebody, then how can I like them? Suppose they're a Democrat and I'm a Republican. Or they're black and I'm white, or they're this and I'm that, how can I like them? And I believe God likes them all. One of the things that I heard you all, as I was being introduced, you mentioned that I worked at Chick-fil-A. And that was one of the things that's the one thing you all responded to. So when I was working at Chick-fil-A, there was a gentleman from Palestine, 21-year-old. And he had just gone back. And one of the things I was able to share with him was that there was a person who lived in his neck of the woods who literally wasn't the same faith as him. Even though he's from Palestine, he was Muslim. There's a guy who's from the Palestinian area who was Jewish, but then asked everybody to follow him. And so what's fascinating about my relationship with Mo is it's like, whoa. Was he Jewish? Was he Muslim? Was he Christian? He said, well, he wanted Muslims, Jews, and all men to know him. He wanted to tear down the walls, to build the bridges, so that there could be relationship. I share that to say that when we look at history, when we look at movements, when we look at change, there has to be unifying people and unifying elements that bring us together rather than divide us. Because there are real things that divide us. But what can we do to bring ourselves together? What can we do to bring each other together? America is a grand experiment. It's a nation built not on just geography, but on the ideals that we live in a civil society, civil being the first word, together. So how do we disagree with the other and still civilly get along with one another? What's been a blessing this General Assembly session is during the State of the Commonwealth address, the governor Caucasian male from Norfolk, Virginia, stood up, presented the idea or the state of the Commonwealth, and behind him was the President pro tem, the President of the Senate, and the Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House was a black man from Texas. The President pro tem was a black woman from Jamaica. Or no, she's the President of the Senate, and the President pro tem was a black woman from Portsmouth. And what's fascinating is that even in their disagreements, there's been amazing civility in working together for the good of the 8.7 million Virginians. It's been a fascinating, beautiful experience. It hasn't been easy because there's a clear division and clear differences of opinion. However, there has been great civility, great respect, and great honor given to each person. That's the Virginia that we live in. That's the Virginia that we can celebrate. That's the Virginia that I want to recognize and to encourage you all to. I want to wrap up with three stories, three different folks. One was a teacher, one was a preacher, and one was a politician. Sounds like a bad joke, doesn't it? The preacher was from Georgia, the teacher was from Virginia, and the politician was from New Hampshire. The teacher from Virginia was a former slave. The teacher from Virginia decided to leave his area, he's from the Roanoke area, and literally walked from his Roanoke area all the way, because he was a former slave, all the way to this place called Hampton Institute at the time. This teacher saw fit to get into school, and his entrance exam was, because he had nothing on his back, he had no clothes. I mean, he wore clothes, but he was ragged and torn. His entrance exam was to clean up a room. His entrance exam was to prove to the head mistress that he could clean up the room and clean it up well. So he cleaned up the room, and it was spotless. And she walked over and had a glove and tested the different things to see if there was any dirt. There was no dirt. He had learned to clean things 3 times, not just twice, but 3 times. He became one of the model students in that university to the degree that he was dean of men. And when it was time for them to start another school in Alabama, they recommended this guy. So they sent him down to Tuskegee, and he started the school that still is teaching teachers today. His name was Booker T. Washington. There's a preacher not far in Georgia, and he was born, his name was Michael. And Michael's dad, I think he was like a teenager, he was around 12 or 13. Michael's dad goes to Europe, and he experiences what was taking place with the Reformation, and learned about this guy named Martin Luther. And so Michael's dad comes back completely transformed and affected by Martin Luther, and comes back and says, son, I'm changing my name. I'd like you to change your name too. And so he changes his name, his dad changes his name, and his son changes his name as well. The preacher begins to not only take on the name, but in a prophetic sense, take on the mantle of this name to lead people in a reformation of the culture of America in Martin Luther King. The politician was a guy, New Hampshire politician. He's from New Hampshire. And the beginning of the war, they begin to ask for recruits. And he decides to petition his senator, if you can make me a general, it'd be great. So they make him a general. And Benjamin Butler is then sent to this place called Fortress Monroe. He goes to Fort Monroe, where he is now the general of the fort. Virginia succeeds in April of 1861, and this now May, he's the head of this fort. And there were 3 guys who show up. They have swum from across the river to get to Fort Monroe to say, we want to be free. And Butler has a decision to make. Do I send these guys back? Because at the time, the Fugitive Slave Act said that regardless of where slaves were, they were the property of their masters, so we had to send them back. So even if he were in Massachusetts, he would have had to send them back. Well, he determines, well, wait a minute. This state has just seceded. So they're enemies. Because they're enemies, and they were being enslaved to build up their defenses of our nation, well, they're not enemy combatants because they were held against their will. So he's a politician lawyer, so he's thinking, what can I do here? Well, we'll call them contrabands of war. Calls them contrabands. Before you know it, 2 weeks later, there are 100 people who show up. Before the war is over, in 4 years, in this one little enclave of 4,500 troops, guess how many people show up to Fort Monroe looking for freedom? 1,000 would be a lot. 2,000 would be amazing. Have you all ever been to a stadium with 4,000 or 5,000 people? There were 10,000 people who went to Fort Monroe to seek freedom. All he was trying to do was to figure out how can I legally do this, get them free. And this was before the Emancipation Proclamation. He begins to lead, and he realizes these men are capable and competent and can fight for their freedom. So he leads the U.S. colored troops into battle. You all have heard about the Battle of the Crater and the Battle of Petersburg. It was General Butler leading U.S. colored troops in those battles. It's fascinating history. Here in Virginia, down the street. So my son, who's now 21, and he serves in the Army and does great stuff. And as he's a kid, we're going, because he was in the Civil Air Patrol, during Veterans Day, we would go to these cemeteries in Virginia, around Petersburg. And in the cemeteries, it would say John Doe or Bill Smith, USCT. Well, what's a USCT?
United States Colored Troops.
Yeah, U.S. Colored Troops. It was humbling. That's Black history. That's U.S. history. That's the history that people not only fought for, because then again, they're fighting for justice, but guess what they're also doing? They're trying to build bridges, which is where I'm going to close and where I'm going to wrap up. Because building bridges is hard. Building bridges takes sacrifice. It's going to cost you something. There were Medal of Honor winners at the Battle of the Crater. 14 USCTs. Medal of Honor winners. When you think about Black history, it's American history, and it's bridge building. When you all think about your history and you think about bridge building, I would now ask you, what bridges are you still building? Not what bridges did you build, because some of you all can reflect on consequential lives of building. I mean, I know if I gave you all the mic, each one of you all could share things that you all did that helped to build this great country, your community, your family, your families. I would challenge you, and I know y'all have rarely heard a younger person challenge you, but I want to challenge you that you all have something that this generation needs. Because you've lived through some battles. You've lived through some difficult periods. And you're still building bridges. Things are very different in 2023 than they were in 1962 or 1982. I was looking at a Gallup poll just yesterday, and it said that today there's a percentage of people who say that they like or they're accepting of interracial marriage. There's a certain percentage. In 1961, there was another percentage of people who said they liked interracial marriage. What do you think the percentage was in 1961? And that's a question to you all. What percentage of Americans, what do you think? Close. What? You were close. It was 4%. So 4% of Americans in 1961 agreed with or supported interracial marriage. Guess what it is in 2023?
Over 80.
That's good. It's 94%. 94% of Americans agree with interracial marriage. What? And some of you all might not agree with it still. But 94% of Americans say it's fine. See, your kids and grandkids grew up with not just kids who were black and white, but kids who were from different countries, spoke different languages, had different religions, and they were cool with it. They are building bridges too. And so, let me go back to my question to you. How are you building bridges today? What are you doing to build bridges of love?
Good question.
How are you communicating to people that you might not agree with? I love you, bro. We live in an amazing country, an amazing state, doing amazing things. You all were a part of it, and I would just want to thank you all for the opportunity to share with you what we're doing in Virginia, what has been done, and what I want to encourage you to do is to continue to do, to be purposeful, to be deliberate, to be intentional in building bridges. Thank you.
We have a few minutes to ask Mr. Brown questions, if you have any. There's one in the back.
I would like to know if you can list some of the concrete accomplishments your office has made since you've been in office in the area of diversity and equity.
Great question. Great question. So originally in the Code of Virginia, what they asked us to do is to ensure that there's diversity in state government. In Virginia right now, when you look at the diversity of our state, around 50% women, 19% African American, 10% Hispanic. In state government, we have 55% of our workforce is women. 22% of our workforce is African American. And 10% is Hispanic. Now, we see that, but we're not patting ourselves on the back. One of the things that we're focusing now on is ensuring that there is opportunity at the mid, senior, and executive level positions within state government. And so what we're doing in a concrete way is coaching, teaching, and mentoring people within our ranks to move up to the senior level, executive level positions so that there's diversity there. So that's the first thing. There are other things as well. So that's what the code has asked us to do. But that's the governor said that's the floor. That's the minimum. See, there are disparities in healthcare and education and in other things as well. And while the code doesn't require you to do that, Martin, how can you help the Department of Education? How can you help the Department of Mental Health? How can you help the Department of Health with health disparities? And so in the Department of Education, I can give you two concrete examples. The first one was there was a great debate about what was happening with our standards of learning. And so there was concern that there was Black history that was being taken out of the SOLs. The standards of learning are what all of the teachers are required to teach over the course of the year so that kids learn about history. Well, we were going through this process and we realized we needed to add more and to clarify some things. And so there is more Black history in our history standards today than there was before, in a concrete way. In addition to that, there is, the question is raised, and I remember growing up, so I grew up in Norfolk, and the question has always been asked, so what started the Civil War? That's loaded, isn't it? So there are those who would say, I remember coming back to Richmond, and this was in the 90s, and there were folks who would say, well, there were states who wanted their rights, and their rights were being violated, and so they wanted to defend their rights to do it as they choose. So in order to protect states' rights, they seceded from the federal government. technically, I mean, constitutionally, I get it. But what did they want the right to do? Right. In fact, in their constitution, which was outlined in the CSA, the Confederate States of America Constitution, if you do a Google search, it's really easy. You do a Google and a cut and paste, and you put the U.S. Constitution beside the CSA Constitution, guess what? They're almost identical.
That's right. Yeah.
The CSA Constitution and the U.S. Constitution are almost identical, except in a couple of areas. There are about 14 specific areas where it talks about property rights in the CSA Constitution. And then we're talking about property, men being property. So in the Virginia Standards of Learning today, when asked the question, what was the start of the Civil War? Rather than the ambiguous response of states' rights, which is what's been said in the past, kids are now taught it was slavery. And then there is supporting documentation to explain that and why. So when you ask the question, what do we do in my role? That would be one of them. A concrete thing of tearing down walls, but also building bridges. Yes, ma'am.
I'm confused about the categories of African Americans or blacks and women.
Mm-hmm.
You pose that as the comparative group you use in government?
So my role as the chief diversity officer is to look at gender, race, ethnicity, and even disability, and all the other factors to ensure that our state government is diverse in a plethora of things, not just diverse in race, but diverse in gender.
I thought you were comparing blacks and women in government.
No, I was just saying that we're a very diverse, our state government is very diverse.
Okay.
That's what I was trying to explain.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. And so we even have policies to ensure that if there's a person with a disability, that they can also work in state government. Another thing that we did was we removed, for the first time ever, we removed some of the barriers that some people have in entry-level positions of having a college degree. 90% of all state jobs now don't require a college degree, which removes impediments and opens up the door for other people, for different people to come in and work in state government. So that's another thing that we've helped to do. Yes, ma'am?
I don't know if this is under your jurisdiction or not, but I just attended a lecture where two prominent clergymen were talking about one of the issues about diversity is affordable housing
Sure.
and housing in different neighborhoods and opportunities that the housing allows. And how is that being addressed?
So the challenge, it's complex. The first thing we do is to remove barriers and ensure that the legal barriers of discrimination or discriminatory practices have been removed. And then the second thing we look at is, okay, well, if the discriminatory practices have been removed, what are the other obstacles, what are the other barriers? And that's where we try to help individuals to become prepared and ready to own homes. But it is the housing disparities are real. And here's what's difficult about disparities. they're real, but then you have to dig deeper to find out why. And solutions are generally not simple. They're extraordinarily complicated. Things have happened over time. You started off because it was a discriminatory practice, but those laws were corrected, but there's still disparity. And so because the laws have been corrected, now how do you ensure that our kids and grandkids can afford a house, pay for one, have the means to purchase one, and the like. And so I don't have an answer for you, but there is a recognition that, yes, there was clear discrimination in the past, and if there's discrimination today, we go after it with guns blazing, address it. But that's not always the case, and if there is something else, how do we address that? Yeah, yes, ma'am?
How large is your department?
Go ahead.
Okay, how large is your department? How many persons work?
So ours is a cabinet level position, which means we're working the governor's office. And we work with all the other cabinet secretaries. And it's almost like a dotted line relationship with the different DEI, DOI professionals in state agencies. And so there are DOI individuals in virtually every state agency. If they don't have the title, they have the responsibility. And so at the Department of Social Services, there's a DOI person. Do they report to me? No, but I can tell them what to do. So it's what's called a dotted line relationship. It's not and so if you ask the question, how many people report to me? There are specifically 3. But how many people can I tell something to do? There are thousands. So it's not as simple as, just that answer, yeah. Yes, sir.
You were lifting up the diversity in terms of race.
Yeah.
How does that affect the policy?
In what way?
How you operate?
Help me to understand your question, I'm sorry.
Are we talking about the fact that you have all of these different races and groups and what have you,
Mm-hmm.
but do they affect how the policy is executed?
I hope so. I think, so the question you're asking is, does the people working for state government who are of different races, do they help to impact the policies? Is that
I guess what I'm really asking, how does that affect what the government, you lifting up what you all are doing in terms of the governor's mandate?
Mm-hmm.
How does the inclusive diversity, how does that affect what the governor is going to do in terms of his policies?
Boy,
You
so
understand what I'm saying?
I think so. I think, what policies is the governor doing to ensure that there's diversity? Or what is he doing through our office to implement diverse practices? He's doing a bunch. I mentioned education in the Department of Labor. One of the things that we do, for example, I mentioned the removal of impediments for people to get in state government, but there were impediments for people who are in, right now, a disproportionate number of African Americans work in the beauty healthcare industry, beauticians, barbers, and also in contracting positions. Many of those positions that are individually owned businesses are contractors to the state. One of the things that we did to ensure greater diversity is to remove the impediment of those people getting licenses and having to get licenses if they came from another state. And so we've created reciprocity with every state in the union so that when they come to Virginia, they don't have to apply for a new license and take 6 months and get all kinds of red tape and letters. They immediately can go to work. And so let's say an individual who's a beautician came from Washington State. When they come to Virginia, they can immediately apply for reciprocity and then begin to be a beautician immediately. That's just one small example, but I say that to say that everything we're doing is we're looking at through the lens of promoting and expanding diversity and opportunity.
That has to be the last question. May I have that for a moment?
Sure.
I want to remind you that before Mr. Brown leaves, I want to give him another thank you, but I want to remind you that next month's focus group is Desiree Roots, and she'll be talking about the arts and me. Now, I have to quickly tell you, I've not met Mr. Brown before today, and he told me he was going to bring a PowerPoint, and I was expecting statistics, graphs, charts, and he gave us so much more, and I really appreciate it. Let's give him a...
I also wanted to point out my better half, Nita, just arrived, my wife. She's going to have lunch with us, so she's here in the back as well.
They want to see.